Alright, welcome everybody to week 11, day 3. Today we're going to be learning how to read from multiple files at the same time. Why? Because that's the hardest thing to do in the Pokemon assignment. The Pokemon assignment is pretty straightforward. You just, not streaming, just talking anyway. Let's see here. Okay. The hardest thing in the Pokemon assignment is just you got to read some of the data from one file, the Pokemon to text file, and then you got to read some of the data from the type system file. And you have to kind of learn to read from them in lockstep. So you read one line from Pokemon, one line from the moves, or not the moves file, the types file, and then put them together in making a new Pokemon, and then you add that to the Pokemon vector. That's your assignment. You do that once for all the Pokemon, you do that once for all the moves. The only tricky bit with the moves is that not all of the moves are valid. In our system, in our game, anything that's a special move or anything that has like a missing data in it, which happens, like you will be given data in real life that has dirty data or is missing data and things like that. For the Pokemon database, some moves have no attack strength, for example, because they're like support moves or things like that. And for our purposes, we just throw those away. So we're not implementing the all the special moves and things like that, but we are going to implement the full Pokemon mechanics, at least for attack and defense and things like that, in part 2. You do not have to do part 2 by Monday. Part 2 will be due later. In other news, I watched the percent successful in the previous class for the quiz. You guys did pretty good on the quiz with the string stream stuff and stuff like that. But as far as the Zybooks goes, 17% of students completed the assignments. So, and we'll have to see how many of those checked the answers. I'll go through the cheat checking system while you guys are doing lab time today. And so I've moved back the Zybooks due date till Tuesday. So you have until noon on Tuesday, after Pokemon's done, to work on it. Some of them are fairly involved, and so I'd like for you guys to do those. So you need the moves for part 1, yeah, I think so, right? Yeah. How easy it is to tell if somebody used Chegg, it's really, really easy. So don't do it. It's a great way of getting kicked out of college, you know. Yeah. And plus, you're not learning. Like like I was saying at the end of the last class, I don't know if you were here at the tail end of that. Really, the only way you can not learn computer science is if you don't try. If you try and fail, then that's a great way of learning. Especially if you try and fail and then I show the right answer, you're like, oh, that's how you do it. It's when you try something and it doesn't work, like you remember that. Like I was saying at the end of the last class, I used to do jiu-jitsu. And like if you're in a tournament or something and a person taps you out with a certain move, you never forget that. That gets permanently embedded in your brain. Failure is a great teacher. And what we're going to do today in lab time, I think pretty much everybody in the previous class failed at. But as such, it was educational after I showed the answer to it. And since it's the skill that you need for Pokemon, today's lab time is going to be really useful. And the only way that you can get by without learning is by not doing it. So really, I've done these studies before where I track the amount of time people spend on Zybooks and doing homework and things like that, and compare that against certain assessments I'll do of their knowledge, and they correlate pretty well. It doesn't necessarily mean causation, and there are some students that do very little work on the Zybooks because they know it already, and then they get a high score. And so you can actually statistically see the students who have been coding their whole life and are taking CSI 40 because they have to. Very little time spent, high outcome, but you can kind of almost cluster those off. Separately, for regular students, the people that have never taken computer science before, which is what this class is for, there's really a direct correlation, and I would argue probably causative as well, that the more time you spend working with it, the more time you spend coding, the more time you spend doing it, the better you get. Because in my opinion, that's how you get good at computer science. It's not through listening to me, or if you just sit here for the next hour and like don't do anything and wait for me to show the answer. That's not how you learn. You learn by doing. You learn by programming. And I think on the upcoming competency exams, I might even make the coding part of it worth more points. Because that's always been the hardest thing for the weakest students, you know. And so I really want students to be able to focus on programming. Okay. And getting they kick you out for chug. Well, cheating. Yeah, not just chug. Course hero, and there's a lot of different things. And I'd prefer just not going down that route. Just don't do it. You know. Just if you need help with something, just post on the help center. We got people at 3 o'clock in the morning who are, you know, able to help you with your homework assignments. You know, all you have to do is start early, start before the deadline, and you get them done. Okay. So, yeah. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna go over reading from 2 files at once. And so your assignment for today is, let's say that you've got one file that's got some tab delimited data, because tab delimited data is the format that we use for Pokemon, right? So that's a very common format in real life. In real life, we use tab delimited data or CSV, or there's some standard file formats. And so this is going to teach you something really useful, which is importing data from a standard file format. And yeah, like, sure, it's a game, but sure, Pokemon is a game, but that data was actually dumped from Bulbapedia, and the skills that you learn for this assignment for Pokemon is going to be one of those really valuable skills you need in real life. And that goes even if you're not a computer science major, even if you're a math major or something like that. Guess what math people do? There's a lot of maybe not if you're a pure theoretical mathematician or something, even though they do actually spend a lot of time programming as well. But if you're doing applied math, guess what you do? Stats and things like that. You're going to be importing data sets and working with them and stuff like that. So this programming assignment is actually one of the really very practical ones, despite it looking like a video game. It's really about teaching you how to import data into a program. Okay. So what you're going to do for today's lab is you're going to be given, and by you're given, I mean you're going to type it, not me. I want you to learn how to create your own input. Creating your own input is a great way of learning to test your own code, which is a skill that sort of gets atrophied by me giving you input testers and things like that. And there is an input tester for Pokemon. It'll tell you your score in advance. There's 11 test cases. So if you get them all right, it's an automatic 110% on the assignment. Most of them are pretty straightforward. I think the last one has some vaguely tricky bits in it. It's got some Pokemon with like really long names, like Fistandantilus, the Destroyer of Grades, and Deoxys Speed Form and stuff like that. So as long as you're reading, as long as you're using getLine to read until the next tab to grab a column of data at a time, you'll be fine. It's really only going to trip people up who are using double right arrow. And they're like, okay, well, if the first word is Mr., then the second word must be mime, and they sort of hard code it, and they're not going to pass those last couple things. He uses scraper, which grabs specific information from a website. Yeah, so there's scraping is like let's say there's a website that's got data on it, and you want to get the data out of the website onto your computer here. That's called scraping a website. So what you're going to do is you're going to create this file. This is a file I call A. You don't have to call it A, but I call it A. And it's got tab delimited data. These are tab characters. So that should be tab delimited too. Okay. So it's got tab delimited data. And then we got another file called B, which is also tab delimited data. And they can have the same number of rows, they can have the same number of columns, or they don't have to. In fact, when you test your code, you should start off by having it be exactly the same dimensions in both A and B, but later on be like, nope, and have, like, you'll see there's more rows in B. There's more rows in B than there are in A, right? And so what your program's going to do, it's very simple, is it's going to read cat A, cat B. When you run the program, it's going to read one cell at a time of data, so to speak, using Excel terms. So it's going to read the 10 here and the 100 here and output 110. It's going to read the 20 here and the 100 here and output 120. So it's essentially given a Excel spreadsheet of data in tab delimited form, and it's adding all the values together. If any of the data values are missing, like this one, then it doesn't print anything. So it'll only print a sum when it exists in both A and B. Okay, yeah, you're adding matrices together, exactly. And you're only going to add them if they both have a number. Don't treat a blank as 0. Although, I guess probably in some applications you could. Here, if you're missing one of the two sides of it, just don't print anything. Okay, so that's your assignment. You're going to have an hour to do this. Maybe over an hour. Okay, so let's go over some tricks and tips. Do you guys understand the application? I'm going to show you a little bit of demo code to get you started, but do you guys understand kind of what we're doing here? So you got an Excel spreadsheet of data exported in tab delimited format, and another one, and we're just adding them all together. Yeah? It's cool? Do you see how, like, I don't know, maybe this could be useful? Yeah. Yeah. You know, this is, obviously we're just adding 100 things, but I mean, it's kind of useful, you know, for real world stuff, you know. Because a lot of times you'll be given a data set in Excel spreadsheet format. Like, here you go. The College Board sent me a CD with, you know, like I said last time, they sent me a CD with hundreds of thousands of test data in Excel format. And so then I get to export them into, you know, tab delimited, or I'd probably, maybe I did, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But whatever format you export it in, then you have to import it into your analysis tool. So, yeah. Okay. So let's do some sample. You're going to create an Excel spreadsheet to write it for. You could, if you wanted to. You could open up Excel and type it all into Excel and then save it as a tab delimited, or you could just go into a file and be like, you know, 10 tab, 20 tab. You know, you make the file that way. But I'm not giving you the files. You have to make them yourself. And when you start off on this assignment, just make them both 3 by 3, tab delimited. You know, and 1 tab 2 tab 3, just to get going. You know, always start small. Start with a minimal amount of the minimal viable product. You know, it's like start by just adding the first cell in both of them together and just see if you get that working. Right, so don't try and do the whole thing at once. Try to get just one number out of the file, and one number out of the other file, one number out of the other file, add them together and print that result. Okay, and it'll look something like this. So, if string, file 1, opening up file A, file 2, opening up the file B. Again, you can call the files whatever you want. It just made sense to me to call them A and B. So this is making 2 variables, one called file 1, one called file 2, of type ifstream. So these are going to open the files for me. I'm then going to, so I'm just going to do the minimal. So I'm going to do just reading the first cell of data for you. And then I'll let you take it from there. So I'm going to say string S1 and S2. So I'm going to read one string, which is the first line. I'm going to read the first line from A and the first line from B using getLine. So getLine from file 1 into S1, getLine from file 2 into S2. Okay. So it's going to read the top line of that, top line of that. And then I want to get the first cell, the first column of data. And because this is a tab delimited file, I'm going to use getLine with the optional third parameter, and the optional third parameter is going to be the tab character. In order to do that, I have to be able to treat the string like a stream. So what is the name of the thing that what is the tool that we use if we want to treat a string like a stream? We want to be able to read from S1 here, which has that whole row of data. It's got an entire row. I want to treat that like cin, you know, so I could read from it. Right? String stream, yeah, very good. So I'm going to create an input stream, string stream, ISS1 and ISS2. And in order to use this, I have to include string. Yeah. And then if I want to read, let's say I want to read 3 integers out of S1, I could have int x, y, z, and I can say S1 double right arrow into x, double right arrow into y, double right arrow into z. Do you see, not S1, sorry, ISS. Like that. And so we can read, this is going to read from the string. So whatever string we have, that's the entire first row of data, the first sentence of the first file, A. And so this is going to treat it like somebody had typed in from the keyboard 10s, 20, 30, return. And so 10 will go into X, 20 will go into Y, 30 will go into Z, if that is in fact, yeah, there it is. So it's going to read 10, then 20, then 30. And I should probably output it, shouldn't I? X, Y, and so it gets 10, 20, and 30 from A. These 3 values here. Okay. Now, we don't want to use double right arrow for our Pokemon assignment because these are tab delimited files. We want to actually read until a tab character is read. And so in order to do that, you have to use the second version of getLine that we've learned, which is read until a tab character is read. So we have to do string temp getLine from ISS1. That's the string stream that we just made out of the string. Say that 100 times fast. GetLine from that into temp, reading until a tab character is read. So read from the first sentence of A until a tab character is read. Now, the single most common question I get in the homework assignment is, can I just put X in here? Can you read from that thing and read right into the integer? And the answer is no. GetLine only writes into strings. So you have to getLine into a string, and then you have to convert from a string to an integer. Do you guys remember the name of the function to convert from a string to an integer? Very good. Destroy. So it'll convert from a string containing the letters 1, 2, and 3 into the number 123. Okay, very good. So, yeah. And then we'll have to do this again for Y and again for Z. A student in the previous class was like, couldn't you just make that into a function? The answer is yeah, you could. And so his name was Bringus, so I named the function after him, and it will take in an iString stream by reference. We'll do that. So we are going to read from the string stream into a string until the tab character is read, and then we return the result. Note that stoy will crash if temp does not hold an integer. Okay. This is something that kept cropping up over and over again. Was that they would do a get line, and they would do a get line until a tab, and there was nothing left on that line. We would return an empty string, and they would try converting an empty string into an integer, and it crashes. Okay, so you probably might need an if statement there or something to handle that. Okay. So we can do this. Okay, so x is equal to bring us ISS1. And you'll see it prints 10, 20, 30 again. So now we're doing it the same way as before, except rather than using double right arrow, which is fine in circumstances like this because it throws away white space. We're doing the tab. We're grabbing all the data in a column, all the text in a column. or reading until a tab character is read. And that's how you don't need to do it for this one assignment, but you will for Pokemon, because Pokemon can have multiple words in their names. So you should grab a column of data at a time. That's the appropriate way of doing it. Okay, so this is all I'm going to give you. You're obviously going to need to wrap this whole thing in a loop. So you're going to read one row, one line from A, one line from B, add them together, output the sums, and then next row, add them together, output the sums, and keep doing that until you hit the end of file on either of them. Okay, so you will have an hour and 20 minutes to work on this. Again, the even, and if you get stuck, if you're like, my code's crashing, I don't know why, it's printing out story something or other, just that's what we have the CSI 48 channel open for. You can probably look at the chat from the previous class. I was sitting there answering questions all throughout lab time. So if you ever get stuck, if there's ever something you need to know, now's your chance to ask. It's low stakes. If you fail this, you don't lose any points. It's lab time. Really, the only way that you could, not get benefit out of this is just to not do it. It's, as long as you put in effort, as long as you put in time, as long as you don't just try chugging your answers, which is just harming yourself and possibly harming your academics, you'll learn, and so just try until you get stuck, and then ask for help. Then you get unstuck, then try more. Okay, so that's the way we learn. Every computer science major, every experienced computer science major has gone through that, and also has gone through that today, probably. Because we look up documentation constantly. We ask for help constantly. That's just part of computer science. Like, nobody knows everything. Nobody knows even close to everything. Okay. The worst thing to do, if you're going to sit there for the next hour and a half and just leave or go to Taco Bell and wait for me to come back and give you the answer, then you're not learning. The whole point of taking this class is to learn computer science. You gotta sit down. You gotta put in the sweat, blood, sweat, and tears. You gotta strive. You gotta fail. Like I said, failure is a great teacher. When you fail, you learn a lot more than if you just don't try and then somebody tells you the answer and you forget it. Okay, if you there's actually studies on this. Midterms and finals shouldn't be educational, but they are. You learn a lot on a midterm and final. Yeah. How does that work? This is what's expected of me, we don't do finals in this class. We do competence exams. So, but okay, just try. Okay, you have until 3:40 to work on this, and then I'll give you the answer. Okay. So I'm gonna mute my mic, and I will turn off my camera, but I'm gonna be watching the chat channel, and I might put on some Cirque du Soleil over here or something. Maybe that distracted the people in the previous class. They were busy watching the clown antics and stuff like that. So maybe I won't do that. Just stay focused on the thing. Okay. How do you see tabs in Vim? :set list, like this. :set space list, hit return, and it'll show you all the white space in a file. Okay. And so you'll need to make the input files. You'll need to make the code. And you got till 3:40. Begin. All right, welcome back, everybody. So we'll go ahead and solve it now for you. You guys can hear me? Hello? Am I streaming? You guys doing okay? All right, cool. All right, so let me show you how I would solve this. So we need to wrap this in a loop, all right? So whenever you do coding like this, you always want to start with the minimum viable product. You want to start with, like I said before, just reading one value from A, one value from B, adding them together, make sure that works. Don't try and do everything at once. You need to gradually and slowly iterate and increment and make better until you get it done. So this approach here, I think the first thing I'll do is replace this with a loop. All right. So I think what I'm going to do is say int x is equal to bringus int y from the second file. So I'm going to read one int from the first file, one int from the second file. So this is the row that we're on. In fact, I might even just call these rows. Row from the first file and a row from the second file. Okay. And then we're going to turn those into string streams and we're going to read from them. So I want to do this in a loop. I want to read over and over again I want to read one column from each file at the same time as they move in lockstep. Now, the problem is this code's going to crash because of this. When you do a get line and there's nothing left, it'll return an empty string. If you pass an empty string to stoy, it throws an exception, kills your program. So let's first of all look at what that crash would look like. So let's first make our loop here and do this while there's data remaining in ISS 1 and there's data remaining in ISS 2. We will do that and see out the sum of the results. That's the meat of our program. Right, that's the core operation, right? We're adding cell, row 3, column 5, and cell 3, column 5 from two different files. We're adding them together and outputting the result. So you could have done a vector and things like that. It's not really necessary because we're not storing it. In reality, you'd probably have a 2D vector or something and, hang on to it. But for this assignment, we're just adding them, so that's all you need to do. And then at the end of the line, we'll just do the end line like that. So we're just going to do the first row first. Okay, don't try and do everything at once. I'm just going to process one row of data. And what we're going to see is when we do this, the code is going to crash. Boom. And so what I asked was, in the previous class, I'm like, what number is crashing your code? And they couldn't answer it. I'm like, well, why not? Well, I don't know. It's not printing out anything. Well, why isn't it printing out anything? Well, because I didn't write a cout statement. Well, why didn't you write a cout statement? Because it'd be easier to ask you what's crashing it. Right? So rather than relying on the professor to solve it for you, see out all the things. Just every time you're about to stoy something, just see out it. Find out what's crashing it, right? And do that. This is a valuable skill for you to learn. And we can see that so let's get rid of the other cout statements because those are going to be interfering with us. And string to integer, and I'll do that. That'll make it a little more obvious what's going on here. Okay, so it's trying to convert a blank string into an integer. That's not a number, throws an exception, crashes your program, kills your program. Okay? What I showed you right here is something you really need to internalize. When your code's crashing and you don't know why, you need to print the things. You need to print all the things. Or you can use a debugger. And there's other debugging techniques too, but like you can see how just easy this is. You just run it and see, okay, where's it crashing? And the students in the previous section were like, I don't know. You tell me. I'm like, no, this is a very valuable skill. You need to learn. You need to learn how to find out where your code's crashing, because then you don't waste your time. Being able to zoom in and find the spot where your code is crashing and figure out why it's crashing is one of the most important skills in computer science. So what we have here is temp getting an empty string. When we try reading off the end of the string stream, there's nothing left, and it returns a new line, or sorry, not a new line, it returns an empty string. And so what we need to do here is just say, if ISS is now false, or if temp is equal to empty string, or if temp.at 0, the first digit, is not a digit. So if not is digit, temp.at 0, then just like return -1 or something on it. Now, this is not good design. It's actually better to throw an exception, but you don't know exceptions yet, so oh well. So this is pretty comprehensive here. You probably don't even need this last bit here because your text files don't have any letters and stuff in them. There's no scrolls in your thing. But if there was, this would handle it. So the first thing it does is it checks to see if ISS is now invalid. If you try reading off the end of the string stream, then there's no data left. And so it'll become false and you return. If it did return something, like let's just say you have tab and there's nothing in it, then it'll return empty string. That will also cause that to crash. So we also return immediately. And then if both of those are okay, then we're checking to see if the first letter in temp is a digit. And if it's not a digit, then that will crash stoy also. So this is a pretty comprehensive check for bad data. We're vetting this pretty well. If all that is true, then stoy will not crash. Stoy will not crash now, ever. It won't throw an exception, ever. It's guaranteed. Unless it gets hit by cosmic rays or something. You tried isDigit, it didn't work. Did you do all three of these, or just isDigit? Because you can't call isDigit on temp.at0 if it's an empty string, right? If it's an empty string, this will crash. So you have to check for this being empty first. There's a certain ordering you have to do these things in. So I'm checking to see if an error occurred. If it did, we bail out immediately. Otherwise, we check to see if it's an empty string. If it is, we bail out immediately. Now, if it's not an empty string, then I can check to see if the first digit is 0. Yeah. If you try calling temp.at0 on an empty string, that will crash. So C++ does something called short circuit evaluation, which means that if any of these things are true, if you have a bunch of OR statements like this, if any of them are true, then it immediately terminates the OR. It doesn't actually do this. It won't do that if you have an empty string. It won't crash. Because if that's true, then this whole OR thing is going to be true, and it does not need to evaluate that. So there's something called short circuit evaluation, which allows you to write code like this without crashing. I didn't actually put that into my previous solution. I just didn't have any squirrels in my code. So just this is sufficient for our purposes. Okay, so if we do that, I'm talking a big game. Let's good, no crash. Okay, let's put this back in here, and it should do the first row. There you go. There's the first row. Except cat A, cat B, you can see it's printing out the 5th value in the row. Right? Because it's returning -1 if an error occurs, right? So we kind of need to not have that in there, right? So how can I detect if an error occurred in either of these? Well, I could check to see if the return value is -1, but what if there's actually a -1 in the file, right? So what we actually want to do is, really we want to throw an exception, but we'll just do this. If either ISS is false, or ISS1 is false, or ISS2 is false, in other words, if we hit the end of the line for either of those, then we're done with our loop. So a string stream, you can keep reading from it and reading from it and reading from it until you hit the end of the line. It's like the end of file on a file. You just keep reading from it until you hit the end of file. And when it hits the end of file, they become false. So you can just say while they're both true, and it'll keep going. And then if they ever become false after a read, then we break. And we'll print the end line, and we're done. And there we go. So now that we are processing one row properly, because that's how an exception look. Well, that's returning an exception right there. This terminate called after throwing an instance of invalid argument. That's an exception. Throws an exception. We're not catching it. So the proper way of catching this is, of course, to do a try-catch block, which you don't know. So I'm being somewhat sarcastic here. So do this. Okay. So if any, so we say try doing these lines of code. If any exception gets thrown, then it stops running this code here and it immediately breaks out of the while loop. So that's the proper way of doing this. Okay. So try getting the next number out of the string stream, and if it fails, stoy will throw. We catch the thrown exception. If you catch it, it doesn't kill your program. It only kills your program if you have an uncaught exception like that. That's what I think it said, actually. After throwing, yeah. So this is the default. There's a default exception handler that kills your program and prints that message. When will we learn more about it? No, a week or two. Something like that. You don't need it for the Pokemon assignment. What I showed you before, where you said if not ISS1 or not ISS2 break, that's all you need. You don't actually need to worry about this, but it's good to know. So try and catch, then you just stop doing the loop at that point. Okay. Works just fine. So now we just need to wrap this whole thing in it. So now that we're processing one row, we need to process all rows. Can you throw in the catch block? Yeah, sure. And because we didn't catch it, our default exception handler catches it and prints int was thrown. Okay. Yeah, so now we need to wrap all this thing. So rather than reading the first line, we are going to say read the next line. Okay, and we're just going to go while file 1 is true and file 2 is true. So while there is still more data in these files, reformat using =shift5 reformats everything between the curly braces, which is a cool thing to do. I'm here, I'm on the open curly brace. I want to reformat everything within the curly braces, everything within the scope. =shift5, there you go. Okay, so while file 1 is valid and file 2 is valid, it gets aligned, and then we should probably do the same thing here and say if file 1 became false or file 2 became false, break. So every time, you need to get into the habit of every time you read data, you need to vet it. You need to see if an error occurred. This is just it's a habit of mine you just need to get into. Every time you do a read ever, every CN, every get line, everything you do, every time you read, you need to say, did something bad happen? You know, did I hit the end of the file, right? There might not be any more data in the file. And I tried reading a line. So what happens? They become invalid. They become false. So if either file 1 is false or file 2 is false, then it breaks, it terminates, and we're done. And there we go. Voila. In my bootleg, initialize my x and y to 0 in the loop. In the end, if x and y were still 0, it didn't print out the sum. Interesting. Yeah, I think the try and catch method is probably the most reasonable. Returning -1 is bad because what if there's a -1 in your input file? Now it'll assume that an error occurred. You know, if you said if the return value is -1, you just can't have -1 in your Excel spreadsheet, which happens, right? You know, some people might try to fix that and be like, return -999 and just hope that -999 is never typed in Microsoft Excel ever. Yeah, it's risky. I once did that in a homework assignment when I was around the time I was entering grad school. Maybe I was a senior, something like that. And if an error occurred, the function would return, yeah, it was like -999. And the professor found it. And I got knocked off on that one. So, because as it turns out, his code, his testing code would feed random data into your inputs, and one of the random inputs was -999, and so it faulted, gave the wrong response. Error occurred. Nope, there was no error. The input was just -999. what are the odds? Pretty good. He was pretty thorough at testing. So, yeah. But that was kind of my reaction, because it wasn't even like, it was like something even more. It was like, I don't know. It was like I just kind of hit some keys and he caught it. Yeah. All right. So that is our class for today. What we learned today. Let's not delete all that. The learning point for today is learning point number 1. How to open and read from 2 files at once. And, you know, so we're going to read a line from one file, a line from another file, and they're going to go down at the same time through the code. And that's how I would do your Pokemon assignment, because you got to read the Pokemon.txt, you got to read types.txt, and you're going to just kind of go down like that. He shows a demo of how Pokemon is supposed to run. I can actually put my executable up if you want. cd Pokemon.reference. Okay. Copy a.out into /public Pokelemon. CHP, chmod, everybody may execute public Pokemon a.out. Okay, so if you want to run my code, it is right there. And don't have your assignment be calling my assignment. I just didn't do that once. They would take input and then feed it to my demo program and then take the result and return it. Kind of clever, but wait, that's illegal. So, you have fun playing with that. It is pretty funny. Yeah, I once did another competition with my students where we were playing Pente. And so this one student, Zach Brunel, I don't know if any of you guys know him, he spent the entire competition trying to locate where my code was in memory, because it basically took his AI and compiled it with my AI. And then the tournament software would basically pass the board state to my AI. My AI would put a move on. Then it would pass the board state to his, and it would place the move on. And the tournament software would verify that the move was legal, that you couldn't like take another person's piece off or something like that. And so he spent the entire competition trying to locate where my AI was in memory and make my AI make a bad move, like make a move that's out of bounds. And then the tournament software would be like, fault, victory goes to Zach Brunel. So he didn't spend any time actually trying to play Pente. He spent the entire time trying to get my AI to not play Pente, which was brilliant, and fortunately he never figured out how to make that work. So he got close, I think. He got close to figuring out how to make that work, but he never actually did. So when we had this big tournament, Mr. Bell, who you've probably seen on here sometimes, he actually had the best AI. I had a bug in mine that his AI exploited and beat mine, which is quite funny. But yeah, we did an AI tournament. It's kind of neat. Okay, so that's it's 4 o'clock. Time to go and enjoy your weekend. Get Pokemon done. Get the Zybooks due by Tuesday at noon. I gave you 1 extra day on the Zybooks, so get it done. All right. See you guys. Peace out.